So today, May 40, here. So the traditional basis of the right and left European politics is that the right gained its support from the church, and the left gained its support from labor unions. And religion and labor unions developed in large part their particular expressions are still dominant today, reaction to the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution needed workers who would be on time, who would follow rules, who would not be drunk, who would be willing to conform. And so the rise of evangelical Christianity helped develop the ethos, helped develop the personality or moral characteristics that would be best suited for success under the Industrial Revolution and capitalism. And labor unions developed as a way to provide a higher quality of life and an organizing principle for labor and help it to more effectively bargain with capital. So these are the traditional bases of right and left in Europe, politics, and the traditional bases for modern expressions of religion. So American Christianity developed as a way to signal that you're a good person, and it provided a simulacra of the traditional form of community that people in Europe enjoyed, where they would grow up, live and die within 10 miles of where they were born. And so you go to Europe, you go to church there, right? There's not the enthusiastic welcome that you'll get in an American church, because the Europeans, by and large, don't have to manufacture that sense of genuine community, while more rootless Americans who move a lot more, who have fewer protections either as workers or just as citizens, right, have to be ready to move around. So America is the only first world country without socialized medicine. Lose your job, you lose your health care. Right? There's a lot more fear. Average American way of life than there is for people in Europe, because there are fewer protections of anyone else in the first world for workers and for citizens. There are many advantages for this, because that fear has a disciplining effect, encourages people to work harder. But it also produces tremendous anxiety in people who want a sense of solidarity, commitment, and the benefits of community. And so you have a prominent role for church and synagogue in the United States that you don't have in any other first world country, because people are grasping here for some sense of the traditional forms of community that people in Europe or Northeast Asia take for granted. So you want to become a Roman Catholic priest in America, right? You have to swim much more against the tide. Right? It requires a much higher level of commitment. It requires more attractive packaging than becoming a Roman Catholic priest in Italy, where such a profession is honored and is much more normal. Now, the right and left in Europe, they no longer can count on the church and on labor unions to be their source of support. Europe is more fractured in the globalized world. So just like America, you have the rise of the globalists, like people who can operate without any firm base, people who can move easily, and those who feel a strong attraction to a particular place. People who feel a strong loyalty to blood and soil, right, they're not going to be down with massive amounts of immigration and the European Union. They want to protect their traditional way of life, their traditional patch of soil, their tribe, their people. And which parties in Europe are appealing to those with strong ties to blood and soil, right? It's quote unquote far right, because the polite parties weren't willing to do that. Remember all that talk from the dominant liberal left elite, the long arc of history bends towards democracy? Not necessarily, right? If democracy doesn't meet the needs of the people, it will go by the wayside, right? If somebody isn't getting their social communal needs met in church or synagogue, they'll very likely leave. If you don't have several friends in your church or synagogue, you're highly likely to leave. No matter how beautiful the theology, no matter how ethereal the practices and the singing and the service, if you don't have strong friends in your church or synagogue, you're likely to leave. If a labor union isn't meeting the needs of its members, right, they will go elsewhere. Conventional politics isn't meeting the needs of citizens, right? They'll look for unconventional politics. So you get the rise of populism. If the rule of experts is not meeting the needs of the moment, then people will demand that more and more of life, right, returns to the purview of the voting citizen, the participant citizen, the citizen soldier. So it's lovely when ideas sound great. It's lovely when every smart person, every educated person thinks the way you do. But if that ultimately is not adaptive to reality, it's not going to dominate for long. Right, so if banding together to subsidize Ukraine's fight against Russia turns out to be against the interests of ordinary citizens of France and Italy, Norway, Sweden, United Kingdom, Germany, then you'll have a rise of what will be called, Putin-friendly populist parties. But Putin-friendly is just a term of opprobrium for a type of politics that is meeting the needs of a new situation. That Russia may indeed have valuable natural gas and oil, other natural resources that people want. People want at a reasonable price. They may get tired of paying the price for subsidizing Ukraine's war with Russia. They may see it as a lost cause, a pointless cause. They get tired of paying astronomical fuel bills. And so they'll want a party in power that is willing to accommodate Vladimir Putin and his desire to wreck Ukraine. It's beautiful to have beautiful sounding politics, beautiful sounding religious principles, to be part of a group that sounds amazing. But how are things working in the real world? So do you really think people are going to be discouraged from supporting a type of politics that better meets their needs just because that type of politics is given, a bad name and called fascist? No. So Brexit increasingly looks like a disaster for the United Kingdom. And so many of these quote-unquote far-right parties, such as in Italy, where they're in government, right, they've abandoned calls for leave the European Union. And right now, may well be in the interests of Italy and numerous countries in Europe to remain in the European Union. And then situations change. People change, feelings change, incentives change. And what's taken for granted as the righteous, the true, the good, the beautiful, the only legitimate policy may well change in different circumstance. The European Union is probably not going to stay in its current form. It's inevitably going to fracture. And more nationalist parties will be willing to give up on these bigger government organizations like the European Union, right? The hard right is aligned with nationalism, which is the most powerful political force over the past 200 years. So for 100 years, religion dominated politics. Empire dominated politics. Right? We still live very much in the age of nationalism. So the mainstream media and the elites will tar these far-right parties as Islamophobic and racist. But due to Europe's sweeping speech laws, the leading spokespeople and powers behind the quote-unquote far-right parties, they've learned to be quite eloquent, to speak in a sophisticated way that skirts these speech restrictions. And as a result, they're heading towards about 25% of political support in Europe overall right now, as Europe heads into elections for the European Parliament. So in 2022, over 5 million immigrants entered Europe. And you think that's considered in alignment with the average European? Do you think they're really thrilled about that? Do you think that their conventional form of politics is suited, has any plan to address this influx? Not really. So immigration doubled in 2022 compared to 2021 in Europe. Doubled. And the average European is not thrilled with that. Right? They just see conventional politics as not meeting their needs. Just like when conventional religion stops meeting people's needs, they move outside of religion. Religion used to dominate people's lives. Now it no longer does. Why? Because people saw that their needs were better met outside of religion in most of the first world. So throughout first world, the rise of industrialization, as society becomes more and more specialized, and as science has more and more of an influence over people's lives, you have the rise in the prestige of science and the decline of religion, because science is meeting people's needs more precisely and effectively for many than religion. So the right is changing more adeptly, more sophisticatedly, more effectively than the conventional parties, because they're not in power, generally speaking, in Europe, so that they can adapt and pivot to genuine needs that are not getting met by conventional politics.